Hello, fellow parents and educators. Thank you for joining me at Education Evolution, where we are disrupting the status quo in today's learning models. We talk about present-day education, what's broken, who's fixing it, and how. I'm Dr. Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your host and founder of Education Evolution and the Microschool Coalition, where we are fiercely committed to changing the narrative, to reimagining the education landscape and creating learning that serves all children and prepares them to thrive. If you are new, welcome to the podcast. Please subscribe on our website to get it delivered to your inbox weekly. If you've been around a while, have you left a review? Welcome, Jethro.
Hey, thank you, Maureen. I am so excited to chat with you today.
It's great having you here. Education Evolution listeners, today I get to talk with Jethro Jones. He's the podcast host of The Transformative Principal and the author of School X. He's also in the process of creating his own microschool. He's a leader of leaders and weekly leads and supports principals in a mastermind group. If we want to transform education, we need to help school leaders and teachers move beyond survival to designing the ideal learning environment. Let's hear how Jethro does just this. Ready, Jethro?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Let's start with why you're pouring out your skills and resources to redesign the principal's professional experience.
Well, for me, it started when I was young. I went to 5 different elementary schools and 3 different high schools, and I realized that school was never designed for me. And so I wanted to get into education to help make school designed for the kids that are in front of us. And then I realized as a teacher and as a principal, I thought school was designed for the adults there, but it was never designed for me as the adult. And so I kept wondering, who is school really designed for? And to be honest, I still don't know what the right answer to that is, because sometimes it's designed for the adults. Sometimes it's designed for the parents. Sometimes it's designed for the school board members. Sometimes it's designed for the legislatures. And it can be very confusing to try to create an amazing school in that type of a situation. So I am on a mission to help principals redesign their schools because they have the most power to do that out of anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got to start a school within a school when I was a young teacher because the principal backed it and helped make it happen. So it absolutely has to be the principals. So how would you describe transformative and why do we want this for our principals?
Well, to me, the real thing is you need to be able to redefine what success looks like. And it's not enough for success to just be good scores on tests or good grades or most of the things that we measure. We measure those things because they're easy to measure. And that's not really what anybody remembers. I mean, you look back at your own childhood and your education. Any other adult looks back on their education and we say, what do you remember about school? And it almost always comes down to one person who made a difference to you as a child or a number of people. But nobody remembers the tests. Nobody remembers their grades. People remember the people who impacted them and believe that they were more than they thought they were. So when it comes to transforming education, what I'm looking for when my podcast is Transformative Principal, what I'm looking for is something that transforms the young person into the kind of person that they can become and starts them on that path. And to me, this is really important because we all have potential. And we think about people who are, famous and they've gone through some sort of adversity and now they're amazing at what they do. And the reason is almost always because there was either somebody who believed in them or helped them get to the point where they could transform into the person they had the potential to become. And I think every single one of us is on that kind of a journey. And that doesn't mean that we're all going to be famous or celebrities or whatever. but we all have gifts within us that, when used, are going to bless the lives of many people. And that's what I think education should be about, is helping those things happen and helping those people learn how to make those opportunities exist for themselves.
I love that. Yes, helping kids find their strengths, unpack their strengths, be able to use them so they are transformed. So, how does that tie into principles?
Well, principals have the ability to help their teachers and their students get to that point. And so it's not just enough for them to just run a school. I was talking to a principal a few months ago, and he said, "This school is not my school. This is the district school. And I'm just here temporarily, and they could move me at a moment's notice," which, that's all true. But when you have that approach, you approach the job differently than if you say, "I'm taking ownership of this school. It's here for me, and it is here for me to help make better. And I'm going to do everything I can to make it meaningful, no matter how long that I'm here." So as a student, when I was young, I wanted to feel like I mattered, wanted to feel like I was important. And the culture of a school starts at the top with the principal, and it disseminates from there. And so the principal is the one who has the power to make those changes so that every student is valued, every student feels the possibility within themselves to be amazing. And that is what really matters.
I love that. Our motto is we want kids to all feel seen, heard, valued, and thriving. And you're absolutely right. The principal sets the culture. That's non-negotiable. So when
Mhm.
you work with principals, you have a mastermind group to support them. Is that right?
That is correct. Yep. We meet
Yeah.
once a week and support them in whatever challenges they're facing. We call it just in time professional development.
Oh, I love it. Just in time is what we all need just to
Mhm.
stay on top of the daily challenges. So, what do you find are some of the life giving strategies or suggestions you guys develop together?
Well, it really comes down to the same basic things for everybody. As you mentioned, we all want to be seen and heard and know that we matter. And that exists for everybody. And so it exists for teachers and principals, and it exists for students. Those feelings really make people do the things that they need to do to live up to their own potential. If nobody's watching me and nobody sees me and nobody knows who I am, it's easy for me to go the path of least resistance. If, however, I know that there's somebody who's paying attention and who notices when I'm gone, who notices when I'm not at my best, who helps me become my best, then I'm much more motivated to make the right choice, even when that person isn't directly watching me. And so that's one of the main things, is people want to feel heard, and part of it. The
Hmm.
other thing that we find is that being a principal can be a very lonely experience, and you're often on an island. It's definitely not appropriate to complain to your teachers about what's going on.
Right.
And you can sometimes complain to your supervisor, but they're dealing with, 10 to 15 other principals. So they're not usually open. You really sometimes have to try hard to get a word in edgewise with them. So it can be very lonely. And I help principals feel like they're not alone. They've got a group that supports them. And finally, it's not about politics in that group. It's about every one of us trying our best to be the best we can, and having people who only want that for us. When you're in the same district or a same role as somebody else, there can be sometimes some expectation that you, quote unquote, know what you're doing, when in reality, we're all making everything up as we go along anyway. And
Yep.
so instead of thinking that is a bad thing, we recognize it, we value it, and we say, what are you making up right now? What are you working on? What's challenging to you right now? And how can we as a group help you become more successful with that?
Oh my gosh, what an important place for principals to be supported and get to dream their next step in transforming their schools. It sounds amazing. And Jethro, you don't just stop there. You've also written a book to help us evolve and transform schools and talked about a design cycle for creating a transformative school experience. And I've got details in my show notes, but can you tell us about your School X book?
Yeah, so the book is called School X, and it really goes back to the things that we've been talking about. How do we design a school that is focused solely on the needs of those who are there? As I mentioned, schools aren't designed for the people that are there. They're typically designed for a bunch of other things. And so if we can redesign our schools to meet the needs of those who are right in front of us, it's going to make it better for everyone. So a good example right now is our newspaper here in Spokane just published a story saying that almost 6% of our students have left the district this school year. Now, if the district would have designed schooling during the pandemic to meet the needs of the families that are here, then not that many kids would have left. And people left because they didn't like what the school was offering or what the district was offering. And those kinds of things, we really have to think, and especially in these situations, we need to think, what do the people need? Find out what they need, use a process to get feedback and see if we're meeting their needs, and then redesign our schools to meet that. And so the book is really about helping a principal go through that process because, like I said, the principal has a lot of power in that. Even if they feel like there are district mandates that they have to abide by and different things that they have to do, they still have a lot of power in making that happen. So one suggestion that I would have during this pandemic is to change the way that we're serving families, because right now, many families do not feel heard and do not feel served, and they feel like they don't exist. And, you get on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever you're using, and you go through the motions of having these classes, and teachers are doing amazing work trying to connect and doing the best that they can, but it's challenging and it's difficult. And so one proposal that I would have is to say, we're going to kind of scrap this whole grade level thing this year. And we're going to take all of our kids and we're going to divide them up by family so that one teacher is focused on 4 families, maybe 5, but not more than that. So the student to teacher ratio can get down, in my district at least, to about 15 students. And if you group them by families. So a teacher could have kids who are in kindergarten, 2nd, 4th, 6th, 12th grade that she's in charge of. However, because this year is so different and so many different things are happening, if she is that one point of contact for those 4 or 5 families, and they know that she's concerned just about them, that makes it so much easier. As a teacher, if you can make 4 phone calls and reach all of your families, that is huge. But we're not taking that approach. We're saying we're going to keep business as usual, keep all the kids in the classes, move them up to the next grade level, and put them with a different teacher, and they're going to have to get to know them virtually, and that just creates a bunch of extra work that doesn't really need to happen. The reality is that kids are learning even though they're not in school. And they still can learn even though they're not in school, because school is not the only place that learning happens. And so we get that this year is a different year and things are going to be different. So we can take advantage of that and say, we're going to do it differently intentionally. And if we make that one change, which is not a little change, and it's not an easy change, and many kindergarten teachers would say, well, I can't have 12th graders because I have no idea what to do. The reality is it doesn't really matter. If you can focus on those families and give them what they need, they're going to love the school. They're going to love the district. They're going to be happy their kids are there because you're going to be focused on serving them. But that's not how our schools are set up. That's just one idea of how to reframe the challenges we're facing right now.
I love that. And my hope with this pandemic and how poorly students are being served because of the system, not because teachers aren't trying, is that we just acknowledge that the system truly isn't working. Like you said, it wasn't even working for you as a child, and create a ton of new options so that we don't go back to something that was barely adequate before. We acknowledge it now and say enough. So I think reframing, like you said, could be a huge way of meeting needs. And I also heard you using a lot of empathy in that example. And I know empathy is a key part of your design process. Could you connect those dots for us?
Yeah, this piece is really important. I'm glad that you brought this up because I want to go back to that empathy. So in my family, my wife, she said, I cannot handle having my 4 different kids on 4 different virtual meetings throughout the day. It's just going to be too much. They need too much help. It's not worth it to me. I'd much rather homeschool them and have all the control because I'm going to be doing all the work anyway. And when she said that to me, I thought, man, that is so insightful because she's recognizing that this is not serving her. And rather than deal with it anyway, she's saying, I'd rather do this different kind of work that's much harder
Mm-hmm.
because at least I can have a say in it and it's not forced down my throat or anything like that. So we need to have empathy. And what I think we sincerely lacked this summer as we were preparing to bring kids back was developing that empathy and seeing what families really needed. So over the summer, I ran workshops to help principals reopen their schools and make plans regardless of what their state or district was going to do, because the principal was going to be the one left holding the bag. And as part of that, I made a requirement that each principal in the workshop called parents who they did not usually talk with, not their PTA president, not, the people they always, that are always calling and talking, but finding 10 people that they didn't usually talk to. And what I heard from that were some amazing stories about connecting with people that they had never talked with before. And one in particular just moved me so much because it was so emblematic of the lack of empathy that we are finding. This principal called a parent, and the parent said, I'm so glad that you called because ever since we went virtual in the spring, I have not known what's going on because I'm illiterate. And everything
Oh,
that came out was all in text. And so it was either texting to the phone or an email that was all in text. And there was no communication about what was going on that was not written in text.
oh
Now,
boy.
to be honest, this principal was making a good choice with the information she had because she had a lot of different languages that were spoken in her school. And she was trying to make it so it was easier to translate so everybody could get it. She did not think about a parent being illiterate. And so
Yeah.
she called this parent, and he was very pleased that she called because he could tell her what was going on. And she said that totally changed everything that I was thinking about serving my students, because now I realize that one of my parents is illiterate. And that doesn't mean that I have to do all this extra work, but now I know. And so I can call that parent or record something and send them the audio recording so they can hear what's going on at the very least. That story just illustrated to me that she, a great principal who was working hard, doing something extra to make sure she was making a good plan, struggled in finding a way to meet the needs of this parent. Now, if she had all the empathy in the world and knew exactly what was going on with everybody, she would have done things differently, but she didn't. And so doing that exercise helped her find that empathy and see where things were broken for that parent. And we need to do that all throughout our school, all the time, doing shadow a student where we get an experience of what the kids go through. I remember the first time that I did that and I followed a student all day long. I was so bored out of my mind, I couldn't believe it. I was like, people, what is going on here? And so, I invited my teachers to do shadow a student as well so they could experience that empathy and see what kids were going through. And a lot of the things that we were training teachers to do to build engagement with kids were actually demeaning to our kids and made them feel like they didn't matter and that their voice didn't matter, even though we were attempting to get more out of them, like hear their voices. But the way we were going about it made it feel like it was infantile and not worth their time. And so being able to recognize what's going on, get feedback, and feedback that's honest helps us build that empathy, because once we see what they're experiencing, that's when we're willing to make changes. If we're not seeing what they're experiencing, we're going to think that we're doing a great job. And in our own minds, we probably are. But the reality is that people experience things differently, and we need to work hard to find what they say is and isn't working.
I love that. Wow. And I've experienced being illiterate in other countries and not knowing how to make a
Hmm.
machine work in Budapest and things like that. And it's so painful. And
Yeah.
so for your principal to get beyond that and then not just have empathy, but to create a solution. Oh, we will do audio recordings. That just speaks of how we can be transforming and including your empathy focus could really help all schools serve so much better. I think everybody needs to buy and read your book. That's for sure.
Well, thank you. I can't say I disagree with that. If and you can get the first chapter for free at schoolx.me. So you can get the first chapter, see what it's all about, and that first chapter really gives the overview, and the rest of the book goes into the details of how to make it actually work in a school setting, and gives lots of stories of how I've made it work, how other principals and other teachers have made it work in different districts and schools really throughout the world.
Absolutely. And when I do presentations, I'm always like, participants, what are you going to do tomorrow when you go back to your schools? Because we can say, oh, I don't have the resources. I don't have the. No, everybody can take one baby step every day. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, even just shadowing a kid for 20 minutes or talking to kids in the lunchroom, there's so many things that can happen immediately. So I think your book with all of its different suggestions could really light a fire and help principals know where to start. I think your mastermind is another great resource for people. We just need to not settle for the status quo and be willing to ask for the help. We ask our kids to be self advocates. I think as school leaders, we have to be self advocates and ask for the help we need too. And you and others are offering it wonderfully.
Yep. And, what you said is exactly true, that we don't have to change everything in this big dramatic way. We can make little changes every single day, little things to make something better for someone. And that's really important. It's more than just, having a vision and moving your school down that direction. It's about having a vision and empowering everybody to make steps towards that vision in their own way and at their own pace, so that they're moving as they need to. You don't ever want to put a lid on somebody. You want to let them go as far as they can. And if you have to, you can, rein them in a little bit, but usually you don't need to, because that's where the real action and excitement is happening, because they care about what's happening, because it's their idea, because they're excited about it. And we need to do more of that, and allow our teachers to use their natural gifts and abilities and skills to really be their best version of themselves.
Absolutely. Yes. Can you think of a time, just off the top of your head, as a school leader, when you were able just to take a baby step, maybe an example of a baby step that at the time may not have felt like it was major, but in hindsight, you can see that was like that pond pebble that ripples out and makes a difference?
Yeah. So this is a good story. I won't go into depth on the whole thing, but I had a mom who was actually a grandma, who was a former gangbanger and had tattoos all over her body, and just looked super mean, and and acted really mean also. And she was a very intense woman. And when she came in to talk to me the first time, she was complaining about something about her grandson who had done something wrong and he was in trouble. And she was going up and down and back and forth about how this wasn't fair and the teacher had it out against him, and there was nothing he could do to be successful, and it was all the teacher's fault, and this needed to stop, and blah blah blah. And she just goes on and on. And this goes back to that empathy piece. So I said, I can see that you've had a lot of really bad experiences in this situation. How about I do something really small? And I don't even remember what this was, because it was such not a big deal. And it
Hmm.
was like, I'll have him do lunch detention with me instead of that teacher or something. I mean, it was not a big deal. And
Yeah.
so it was just this little tiny thing. Now, this grandma went from being a literal thorn in our side, contradicting and going against every decision we made, to when she came into the building, she would come and give me a hug. and, and she
Oh,
became our biggest advocate, because I listened to what she was saying. I had empathy, and then I made a little change to make life better for her. In the future, guess what? Her grandsons still got in trouble. So it's not surprising, but they did. And so they continued to get in trouble. And she kept saying, I don't want them to go down the same path as me. And what I was able to eventually tell her was, if you don't want them to go down the same path as you have to do things differently than how things were done for you. You need to keep them away from the people who would take them down that path. So that means not bringing your old gang friends around. You need to find good male role models for these boys to have, not the deadbeat that you're dating right now, but find somebody else. And we were able to have those real deep conversations because she knew that I cared about her and her two grandsons. And that still is not even that big of a change. But for her personally, that was a huge change. And for me, I could see that she really wanted something better and different for her family than what they had been exposed to, than what these kids' mom and dad, who were also involved in gangs, had been experiencing in their life as well. And it doesn't take much. Nobody had ever heard her before because she was a gangbanger who had tattoos all over, and she looked really intense and acted intense to fulfill that view. And it was inspiring to see how quickly she showed her true colors of the kind of woman that she was.
Wow. And you weren't judging the proverbial book by the cover and took a moment to have empathy and get to know her and look at what you reaped. Wow.
Yeah. And
That's
I was
just
scared of her. I'm not going to lie. She was a scary lady. I mean, she, and the kid's grandpa, who she was not married to, but they were still together. So they would come to meetings together. He was just as scary as she was. But the reality is deep down inside, she wasn't a bad person. She just looked like it on the outside. And once I could get past that myself, I could see her as a kind, loving woman who really wanted what was best for her grandkids.
Nice. I had a little similar experience this week just with a new family, and we've shifted from outdoors to indoor, windows open 6 feet apart. And so we've had to change it to middle school at our micro school in 2 days and high school in 2 days. And this parent really wanted more and wanted different. And I wrote back and just said, here's what we're doing. Here's why. Here's what we're checking on. And I'm like, oh gosh, is this going to be a parent? It's a new family. And all she wrote back was, thanks for listening. It's like, oh my, that's right. When we take time and hear people, sometimes that's all they needed. So it was like, whew.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's a good illustration of, it's a simple thing to let them speak and be heard. And oftentimes that can dissolve the whole situation.
Yeah. Well, Jethro, I have one last question for you. If you had a magic wand to help all schools become transformative places for deep learning, what would you wish for?
Well, if I had a magic wand, I would do a little spell to make it so that everybody could understand the intentions of the other people. So that if you were a student and your teacher or principal's intentions were not in your best interest, you could have a little light pop up that says they're not trying to serve you. And then you could go find the person who would. And if they were doing their best, then that would also pop up and it'd be green and it would say this person's doing the best they can. So even if it's not perfect, it's still them trying their best to serve you. And we can handle that. We can definitely handle that.
Yes.
So that would be the thing. A little wand to help everybody show their real intentions.
Boy, and think of some of the misunderstandings. Either it's like, whoa, we are on the same page. They are trying. Or, hey, this isn't working. I'm going to go somewhere else. All the conflicts we could avoid. I think that's a very creative magic spell to cast.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us today, Jethro. And I am going to be sure to put your book and your podcast and your website in the show notes. You guys, check him out. We need to be supporting our principals and school leaders in creating the transformation that we are all longing for. So thank you, Jethro.
Thank you.
Jethro had fascinating questions to start our conversation. Who is school designed for? How often do we really think about that? And if we're really truly hitting the mark? His other question, what are the measures of success? Well, we know many students don't feel that schools are designed for them, and nor do the teachers scrambling to teach to state tests and manage high volumes of students. And the measures of success, do we really care what grade a student got on an essay? Or do we care that they know their strengths, they know their skills, they are using a growth mindset, they are mentally healthy, they are capable, they feel seen, heard, and valued? I think thriving kids is better than completing assignments. So how do we measure for that? And what if we could stop and ask students, teachers, and parents these two questions and let their answers help us reframe learning? Can you imagine how powerful that could be? Talk about education, evolution, and possibilities. Jethro's reframing of teachers being assigned families with an emphasis on communication and support was a perfect case in point. If we are really focused on who school is designed for, reframing like this would allow us to focus on listening to students and parents versus compliance on completion of schoolwork. Which is truly the priority for our schools? As more students disengage during the pandemic and more parents become anxious and overwhelmed, business as usual focus on output of schoolwork is missing the mark. Finally, with all we undertake to transform education, remembering Jethro's magic wand of empathy, with us focusing on intentions of others, assuming best intentions, and playing to the strengths will serve us well. Thank you for listening today. I know how challenging it is to make changes inside your own school or community. I've spent years working with schools around the world on creating learner-centered programs, and it always struck me how much schools were able to get done with the right tools and guidance. If you're ready to make changes like this in your own school, let's talk and put together an action plan. Visit educationevolution.org/consult for a free 15-minute call, and let's see if we're a good fit for more work together. Education Evolution listeners, you are the ones to ensure we create classrooms where each student is seen, heard, valued, and thriving. We need you. Let's go out and reach every student today. I'd be so grateful if you'd head over to your podcast app to give a great rating and review if you found this episode valuable. Don't wait. Please do it right now before you forget. I really appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Signing off, I am Maureen O'Shaughnessy, your partner in Boldly Reimagining Education.